Introduction to the concept of not for federal identification. The phrase not for federal identification on a driver's license is a topic of interest for many individuals in the United States. This term is associated with the Real ID Act of 2005, a federal law that sets standards for state-issued identification documents. Understanding the Real ID Act. The Real ID Act was enacted to enhance the security and authenticity of identification documents. It requires states to verify the identity and residency of applicants before issuing a driver's license or identification card. The law also sets standards for the design and security features of these documents. Purpose of the Not for Federal Identification label. The Not for Federal Identification label is used to indicate that a driver's license or identification card does not meet the federal standards set by the Real ID Act. This label is typically applied to licenses issued to individuals who are not eligible for a Real ID-compliant license, such as non-citizens or those who cannot provide the required documentation. Implications of having a Not for Federal Identification license. Having a driver's license with the Not for Federal Identification label has several implications. For instance, it may not be accepted as a valid form of identification for domestic air travel or to access certain federal facilities. However, it is still a valid form of identification for driving and other state purposes. How to obtain a Real ID compliant license. To obtain a Real ID compliant license, individuals must provide the required documentation, such as proof of identity, residency, and citizenship. The specific documents required may vary by state, but they typically include a birth certificate, passport, or social security card. Best practices for individuals with a Not for Federal Identification license. Individuals with a Not for Federal Identification license should be aware of the limitations of their license and plan accordingly. For domestic air travel, they may need to use an alternative form of identification, such as a passport. It is also essential to check with the state's Department of Motor Vehicles for information on obtaining a Real ID compliant license. Conclusion. In conclusion, the phrase Not for Federal Identification on a driver's license is an important concept that individuals should understand. By knowing the purpose and implications of this label, individuals can take the necessary steps to obtain a Real ID compliant license and avoid any potential issues with identification.